Live from Washington, D.C., Jay Sekulow Live. Phone lines are open for your questions right now. And now, Chief Counsel for the American Center for Law and Justice, Jay Sekulow.
Can the President of the United States change the law? The answer on his own is no, he cannot. The Supreme Court of the United States has just announced, literally within the last couple of hours, that they are taking what I think is now certainly one of the biggest, if not the biggest, case of the Supreme Court term. You'll remember the President made a move on the issue of immigration where he stopped deportations. He was basically granting amnesty to 5 million people here illegally. He did this through what he called executive action, executive orders. We went to court on behalf of, ready for this, 113 members of the United States Congress, over 250,000 of our members. We won at the district court. We won at the Court of Appeals. Now the case is being heard by the Supreme Court of the United States. The ramifications of this are huge. It is a question of the separation of powers. Does the President of the United States have the authority to engage this issue by the stroke of a pen? We think the answer should be no. Our job now, convince the Supreme Court. Fan, let's talk about the ramifications of this are huge. We were the lead on this one. We testified before a subcommittee on this that dealt with this issue early on and laid out the case.
Jay, this is one of the most brazen flip-flops that this president has made. He said more than 20 times this was a power that he could not do. Then he came out and did it. You immediately went before the House Judiciary Committee, chaired by Chairman Goodlatte, and testified about the unconstitutional nature of this act. Congressman Goodlatte, Chairman Goodlatte, and others were among those 113 that joined with us making that exact argument at the appeals court. We carried the day. We're going to do it again at the Supreme Court.
All right, folks, this is historic, and you can be part of history. This is not something we do all the time, but we're doing it here. How would you like to be on a brief to the Supreme Court of the United States? You can do it right now. You can sign on to our committee to defend the Constitution and stop the president's lawless action. Go to aclj.org or call us right now at 1-877-989-2255. Join this committee. You're going to be on a committee that files a brief at the Supreme Court of the United States. aclj.org or 1-877-989-2255. You talk about history for your children and grandchildren. You could tell them you were part of a Supreme Court case. aclj.org to sign on or 1-877-989-2255. If you want to talk to us on air, 800-684-3110.
The United States Supreme Court has decided to take a landmark case. The High Court will hear a critical case involving the unconstitutional overreach by President Obama on immigration. The lower courts have blocked the president's unlawful action. Now the High Court will weigh in. The American Center for Law and Justice has been involved from the very start, challenging this unlawful plan in the courts. Now we're gearing up for the fight at the Supreme Court. We will be representing members of Congress and thousands of Americans, urging the High Court to put a stop to President Obama's overreach. Stand with the ACLJ now. Add your name to our Supreme Court brief. The Constitution is clear. The President enforces the law. He does not make the law. Call now, 1-877-989-2255. That's 1-877-989-2255, or add your name online, aclj.org.
Let me tell you what has happened. The Supreme Court of the United States has granted review on the president's executive action overreach. He said he understood what the law is. Let me play this flashback from the president. This is number 35 here. I want you to hear this.
You know, I'm the president of the United States. I'm not the emperor of the United States. My job is to execute laws that are passed.
It's called the clause of the Constitution that he violated here, and that's what's fascinating. This is regardless of your view on immigration. The Take Care Clause of the Constitution's Article 2, Section 3 says that the chief executive of the president shall take care that the laws be faithfully executed and shall commission all officers of the United States. This is a violation of the Take Care Clause. Now, I've told you, I'm in favor of comprehensive immigration reform, which I believe starts with really securing the borders so that there's not an issue. You got to know who's coming in the country. If they don't pass a check, you don't get in. But this situation, regardless of your view on immigration, the President of the United States doesn't have the authority to change the law. He says, I'm not a king. We're going to get that one loaded in a moment, but we've got it. So let me play this again. The President of the United States says, I'm only one man. I'm not a king. I'm not a monarchy. Here's what he says.
Ultimately, I'm one man. We live in a democracy. We don't live in a monarchy. I'm not the king. I'm the president. And so I can only implement those laws that are passed through Congress.
That's exactly the point. And that's the point, then, of our Supreme Court brief, which will be significant on this issue, since considering it looks like we're going to be representing the leaders of the House and Senate on this.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, the president said what you just played more than 20 times, Jay, and then he came out and admitted that he did the exact opposite. And one of the most gratifying things at looking at our brief and the 113 members of Congress that are on it, Jay, they are all over the board when it comes to immigration policy. I mean, some of them support very comprehensive immigration reform, including, by the way, some of the things that the president did. But they all recognized that it is Congress's authority to do it, and they can't let the president get away with overstepping his bounds. Otherwise, he will just pick any issue under the sun and legislate how he wants. So very diverse group on this brief, Jay. They all stood for the constitutional authority there.
So this is my written testimony, and our folks on the website. So this is my written testimony that I filed when we went to court, when we appeared before the Judiciary Committee. This was the actual testimony. And we raised, our team did, on page 8, the take care clause. That the laws be faithfully executed. The president has to take care that they're faithfully executed. So we raised that issue. It didn't get a lot of attention in the lower courts, but it sure did get a lot of attention at the Supreme Court of the United States because they added the question on it. I think that's a good sign for us. We are very encouraged. Here's what I said when I testified.
Distinguished members of the committee, on behalf of the American Center for Law and Justice and over 75,000 of our members, thank you for allowing me to appear before you today. Determining presidential authority is a task which must be engaged in with only one question. Does the president's actions meet constitutional scrutiny? In this case, they do not. It is humbling for this grandson of a Russian immigrant to be before this committee today. My father is in the audience. His father, my grandfather, came to the United States in 1914. In 1929, he applied for citizenship and filed a petition for naturalization. My daughter-in-law found this online. 2 years later, a United States District Court judge in Brooklyn, New York, granted Sam Sekulow his status. She found that order as well. I believe in immigration. I'm the grandson of that Russian immigrant. I get to argue cases before the Supreme Court of the United States and appear before this committee. That's a humbling thing. Immigration law was complex for my grandfather in 1931, and it is still complex today. The Constitution, however, is not. Our system of government is straightforward. Congress writes the law, the president executes the law, the judiciary interprets the law. This is the separation of powers mandated by our Constitution. The president does not make the law. Now, with due respect, some of the statements that have been made, the president has stated that he changed the law. And I don't believe there's anyone on this committee that believes the president has the authority to change the law. He was being heckled at an event. Similar to what we experience today. There's passion on the side of the issues. I understand. I think we all understand that. I joined Professor Rotunda, and I believe in significant and complete immigration reform. I believe in a pathway to citizenship. But I believe to do that through the legal process set forth in the Constitution. And the president doesn't get to change the law. He actually said that, though, that he changed the law. That was how he handled the question that was asked. He changed the law. Presidents cannot change the law. He can't do so constitutionally. He cannot do so under Supreme Court precedent. He can't change the law to comport with his preferred public policy, much of which I share. The president's executive action really disrupts the delicate balance of separation of powers that is the hallmark of our constitutional framework. Justice Frankfurter stated that regarding immigration and immigration issues, talking about being the exclusive power of Congress, that the formulation of these policies is entrusted exclusively to Congress. Now, 5 and 5 does not equal 15, no matter how many times you say it. And when 5 and 5 then equals 10, which is correct, that past constitutional wrong is not what made that correct. So this reliance that we've seen on some that President Reagan and President Bush and even President Eisenhower made or issued executive action or executive orders which in some cases may be clearly distinguishable because they didn't set forth a new class, but even if they were not distinguishable, past constitutional acts do not get better with time. They are still just that, unconstitutional actions. President Obama also misplaces his reliance on the authority generally granted to the Secretary of Homeland Security. It's very different to utilize your resources to determine the status of your prosecutorial mandates and how you're going to use your limited resources. The condition of entry, though, of classes of aliens and having that denied or granted and creating a class, a new class, is not what the president has the authority to do. As sympathetic as it might be to the plight of people involved, he simply doesn't have that constitutional authority. And I think that with all the emotion we've even seen today, you have to put that aside. The question is, it comes back to the same question. Does the president have the authority? And by the way, if you look at the OLC memo and compare it to what the president said the deal was, quoting the president's word of what the deal is, I'd ask my colleague from the Immigration Law Center if she would recommend her clients accept the deal. Because the deal the president talked about did not talk about unfettered discretion with the agency that could be terminated at any time with case-by-case determination. That's not the deal the president talked about. That's not the deal the president put in place. And I would not recommend my client to accept the deal that the president has actually offered, which is very different than the deal outlined in the OLC memorandum. I would ask that to my colleague because standardless, absolute discretionary review by government agencies has been something I've been dealing with for 30 years at the Supreme Court of the United States, and it just generally does not go very well for the agency. OLC said it was required, though, for the president's actions to be deemed constitutional. As I said, I would not recommend my client to take the deal. In conclusion, in our view, President Obama's actions are unconstitutional. President Obama's actions are unlawful. President Obama's actions violate the separation of powers. And in conclusion, even with sympathy to the cause of immigration reform, impatient presidents may not violate the Constitution if they don't get their way. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
So this is, Stan, really a constitutional showdown.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, it really is.
It really is, and people need to think about how strategic this whole process has been. I mean, when a separation of powers principle is violated, the offended branch has to stand up and fight back. That is what you and Chairman Goodlatte were doing at that hearing. And then, Jay, it has to carry forward and engage the fight in the courts. You can do it at no higher level than the Supreme Court of the United States. And the outcome of this case is going to have sweeping ramifications, but it dates all the way back to engaging at that very first hearing and then carrying it through the process.
December 2nd, 2014, President Obama's executive overreach on immigration. There you go. The president said he changed the law. Do we have that bite up? Here's what the president of the United States said. When he said, I just changed. Remember, he said he couldn't change the law. He's not a king. Then he said this.
You're absolutely right that there have been significant numbers of deportations. That's true. But what you're not paying attention to is the fact that I just took an action to change the law. Now,
the president doesn't get to change the law. I said impatient presidents don't get to change the law on their own. They've got to work through the legislative process. That's the way that's our constitutional republic. That's separation of powers. So the reality is this is one of those situations where we go to the Supreme Court of the United States. I want you to go with us. You could go with us to the Supreme Court of the United States by signing on to this brief. You do it just by going to aclj.org, add your name, or call us at 877-989-2255. And we want to get your opinion on this as well. Talk to us on air, 1-800-684-3110, and a ton of comments coming in as well.
That's right. We just had a comment from Kay on Facebook. She said, do you think there's been too much power that's been shifted to the presidency and the Supreme Court? Should Congress have much of a role as they were given in the Constitution?
So there is this question, what's called the unitary executive, this unified executive, and there's a lot of executive authority. I think, look, the balance has to be struck here with what our framers of the Constitution decided, which was there are three co-equal branches of government. I talk about this, by the way. This is exactly why we wrote our book, Undemocratic. This is exactly why we wrote the book Undemocratic, because of this issue. And we've just put out in paperback, it's coming out in about a week, with an expanded version of this, which you can pre-order at Amazon or Barnes & Noble right now. It's the paperback version. I encourage you to get it. This is the reason why you fight back. But I think the way to get it back into shape is the Supreme Court we've won these at the Supreme Court before, Logan, recently against this president. I think we win this one again. It's going to be a hard fight, but we are going to fight back on this issue at the Supreme Court of the United States.
Yeah, a lot of prayers and support coming in from people. There's this from Lana on Facebook. God bless the ACLJ and the Sekulow team. God watch over their grace. We have a lot of people who are ecstatic about this, and obviously the success of other issues this week. So a lot of goodwill right now amongst our audience, which is not necessarily the case. It's usually a lot of people that are very frustrated.
Right.
And today is a nice day of people that feel their success.
Then again, as we've said, no matter what your position is on immigration reform, and I believe we need reform in the I start with borders, though. I don't ever budge on that. You start with borders. But the reality is, this is way beyond that.
It's way beyond it. It's about who has the authority to write the law, Jay. I mean, the president used the excuse that Congress hasn't acted. Well, guess what? Article 1 says Congress can act or they don't have to act. In this case, Congress didn't act. I think they would have, Jay, had the president give them a bit more time. But the question here is, who has the authority to act? And the answer is very clear in this case. It's Congress.
Yeah. President said he wasn't a king. Take a listen to this.
Ultimately, I'm one man. We live in a democracy. We don't live in a monarchy. I'm not the king. I'm the president. And so I can only implement those laws that are passed through Congress.
Yeah, so here's the good news. We're going to remind the Supreme Court what the President of the United States just said. All right, let's take another call or comment.
All right, call. Sean's calling from Aztec, New Mexico.
Hi, Sean.
You're on the air.
Hey, Sean.
Hello, Jay.
Hey.
Hey, I got a question. With President Obama, would it be possible? I'm not understanding why he's so audacious and why we can't stop him. I mean, it would seem that he gets away with everything.
Well, he doesn't. I mean, look, we've checked him on a number of these and we've won, but he's in the last moments of the last time of his. Just the very last part of his presidency. So you better Sean, like we've been saying. People better buckle their seatbelts. We're going to be doing. There's going to be a lot of legal activity for the ACLJ and a lot of congressional activity for you in our government affairs office. This is going to be the president trying to get the rest of his agenda through any way he can.
Yeah, there's going to be a lot more of this, Jay. He doesn't have to go back to the voters, so he'll try to do as much of this as he can in his final year. But listen, we can stop him. We have stopped him. We will stop him again. There will be other opportunities. We can't identify all of them right now.
Right.
But let's not give in. We can stop him.
What a time for you to be part of history. You can sign the brief to the Supreme Court of the United States. You can be part of this committee to defend the Constitution. ACLJ.org or 1-877-989-2255. You talk about history for your children and grandchildren. You could tell them you were part of a Supreme Court case. ACLJ.org to sign on or 1-877-989-2255. I'm going to urge you to do that right now. Everybody that's listening to me, no matter how you're listening to us, ACLJ.org or 1-877-989-2255. That's ACLJ.org or 877-989-2255. Signing a brief to the Supreme Court of the United States on the president's overreach on immigration. Back with more in a moment.
The United States Supreme Court has decided to take a landmark case. The High Court will hear a critical case involving the unconstitutional overreach by President Obama on immigration. The lower courts have blocked the president's unlawful action. Now the High Court will weigh in. The American Center for Law and Justice has been involved from the very start, challenging this unlawful plan in the courts. Now we're gearing up for the fight at the Supreme Court. We will be representing members of Congress and thousands of Americans, urging the High Court to put a stop to President Obama's overreach. Stand with the ACLJ now. Add your name to our Supreme Court brief. The Constitution is clear. The President enforces the law. He does not make the law. Call now, 1-877-989-2255. That's 1-877-989-2255 or add your name online, aclj.org.
Brief is probably going to be doing about a month. maybe a little bit longer. We may have until first week of March. So our team's working on it already. We've got it pretty well outlined because we were obviously been working on this the whole time. But this is a huge case. Ramifications for the president are huge, too. This will be the signature decision of the term on presidential authority. And we've got two that are big. You got the Little Sisters of the Poor, and you've got this. Both situations where the president, in our view, overstepped constitutional bounds. So these are big, big cases with really big ramifications. But as I said, I don't ever want to count. You got to get to 5 here. We're going to work really hard. You can be part of this. Again, aclj.org or 877-989-2255 to be part of the brief. But let's take some more calls and comments, Logan.
Yeah, let's go back to the phones. Let's go to Rich, who is calling from Redmond, Washington, with an interesting question. Yeah. Rich, you're on the air.
Yeah. First, a quick comment. Thank you so much. Humongous thank you for getting Pastor Said and the others out. Absolutely wonderful. And then the question is in regard to Sotomayor and Kagan. Isn't there some sort of responsibility or obligation or rule that they ought to recuse themselves?
So
they were appointed by Obama?
Yeah. No, that's not the. I mean, yes, the recusal issue. There's always a recusal issue in the case when you've got former government officials. So for not so much for Sotomayor because she was not in the Department of Justice, but for Elena Kagan because of her role inside the administration, she would have to review the situation to see if she worked on this in any capacity before, and if she did, she'd have to withdraw. I mean, she would have to recuse herself. So that's a decision the justices make. It's a good question, Rich. We got involved in this, and I think this is important for our. It's almost parallel to how these other situations, whether it is Saeed Abedini or whatever, we get involved in these cases at the outset when there's hardly attention being paid. I mean, whether it's a subcommittee hearing or a committee hearing, and can kind of shape the debate. Walk our audience through what their support is doing for the ACLJ, allowing us to get to this moment on the Supreme Court case.
You've got to engage these at the ground level, Jay, because then it allows you to frame the argument in the way it should be framed. I mean, think about this issue. There's so much hostility in many ways around the immigration debate. People in both parties on all different levels of that debate. But we knew from the very outset when this ruling happened that is not where this case would come down to. It would come down to a question of separation of powers, and that was an angle that we could unite a very large majority of the legislative branch around. So when Chairman Goodlatte came to us and said, I want to do a hearing talking purely about the constitutionality of this executive action. That was a perfect angle. We engage. And Jay, quite frankly, that's why there's 113 members of Congress with us, because we haven't engaged the policy issue per se. We've engaged the constitutional issue.
Right.
And at the end of the day, we're going to win that one.
Logan, who's next?
A lot of people are coming in just saying they signed the petition or signed the brief and excited to be a part of such an amazing thing. Let's go to the phones, though. Let's go to Sherry, who's calling from Missoula, Montana, on line 1. Sherry, welcome to Jay Sekulow Live. You're on the air.
Hey, Sherry.
Hi, thanks. Thanks for giving credit to God. But my question is there any way he could reverse the Supreme Court decision?
No, he cannot. So here's what happens. The Supreme Court is the final authority on what is constitutional or not. And that means that when the decision comes out, the president is obligated, as under our framework of the Constitution, under the separation of powers, to abide by the Supreme Court's ruling. Thus, if the Supreme Court says that the president overstepped his constitutional authority, which is what our argument's going to be, that he violated the Take Care Clause, which is take care of the laws faithfully executed, that, in fact, will be the end of the case, and that order of the president stops. So the ramifications of this, and I'm glad you're calling us, Sherry, are huge. I mean, the ramifications are gigantic. I think it's the biggest case of the term, certainly this and the Little Sisters of the Poor. Now, I want you to understand something, everybody that's listening. So we're working on that brief, right? And we testified at the Judiciary Committee on this, kind of laying this whole case out. And then we went to court on it. At the same time, we've got the Little Sisters of the Poor briefs being done. I'm doing a case at I'm arguing a case at the Georgia Supreme Court in February. We saw the release of Saeed Abedini. There's a lot going on. But again, this is a big issue. It's breaking news. If you're just joining us or late in the broadcast here, Supreme Court's going to take that immigration. Let me play a comment here from Darrell Issa, the congressman from California, who's been very much engaged in this one. Let me play number 14.
If we allow this authority to be left unchecked, the president could at any time pick any category, any group of people, and allow them all to stay here simply under the basis that he created a list of requirements that if they met them, they could stay.
Yes, and under his theory, at any time he could change his mind the next day and say, now you all have to leave. That's the problem.
That was you actually saw the testimony from that hearing.
We do have a kind of a question coming in that's kind of regular. Is there any risk for people being part of the brief?
Oh, zero. So what we do is you sign the committee actually files the brief. So you're not individually liable, you're not individually listed, but we will know that you're part of the committee. We put that number in the brief, how many people are in it, and for those that want it, we can send them a copy of the brief actually when it's done. We've done that before. We've essentially sent you a copy of the committee's brief. So we want to get to at least 100,000 people or more. I'm sure we will. Again, there'll be multiple ways for you to engage. Time to grab one call quickly before the end here, Logan?
Yeah, possibly, but just to kind of clarify again, someone said, what does signing up for the committee actually mean? That's from Cheryl.
So you sign the committee, and then the committee actually files the brief before the Supreme Court of the United States. So what you want in a committee like this, and Than can address this too, is you want all 50 states represented on this committee. I think that is a big part of what we need to do here. So we show broad support. It also shows the number of people that are supporting this issue. Than?
Yeah, it helps on two levels specifically, Jay. I mean, the one that you've laid out, it shows overwhelming grassroots support. But I'm here to tell you, it specifically helps me when I go to these members of Congress who we want to engage, for me to be able to show that, tens of thousands of their voters, not just Americans, but their voters want them to engage this issue. That's a part of the way that we're able to get to 113 members. If we didn't have our grassroots support in this, Jay, they wouldn't take nearly as much interest in it.
So what it does is twofold, Logan. It helps us both get wide support from Congress, and also lets the court know that people from all over the country are worried about it. So sign that brief and be part of history. ACLJ.org or 1-877-989-2255. That's ACLJ.org or 1-877-989-2255. I think when we file the brief, we could probably send you a download to get that brief so you could print it out. So there's a lot of ways to do it. ACLJ.org or 1-877-989-2255. Become part of history, filing a brief to the Supreme Court of the United States. You can be on that committee. ACLJ.org or 877-989-2255.
The United States Supreme Court has decided to take a landmark case. The High Court will hear a critical case involving the unconstitutional overreach by President Obama on immigration. The lower courts have blocked the president's unlawful action. Now the High Court will weigh in. The American Center for Law and Justice has been involved from the very start, challenging this unlawful plan in the courts. Now we're gearing up for the fight at the Supreme Court. We will be representing members of Congress and thousands of Americans, urging the High Court to put a stop to President Obama's overreach. Stand with the ACLJ now. Add your name to our Supreme Court brief. The Constitution is clear. The President enforces the law. He does not make the law. Call now, 1-877-989-2255. That's 1-877-989-2255, or add your name online, aclj.org.